This is a screenshot of Florida Constitution, Article 9. Adequate provision shall be made by law for a uniform, efficient, safe, secure, and high-quality system of free public schools that allows students to obtain a high-quality education. These are a few excerpts from an article written by an excellent journalist, Mark Woods. This was published in the local paper, the Jacksonville Times-Union. This isn't meant to vilify charter schools, he says in his article. They shouldn't all be lumped together as one. There certainly are success stories, schools with a proven record, but these grades, which I'll show you on the next slide, aren't just an anomaly. From the beginning, there have been reasons to question the push to privatize public schools. 9 of the district's original 14 charters closed because of the problems that included financial mismanagement, low student performance, and at one school, evidence of cheating on standardized testing. So here's what he was talking about, the grades. 63% of charter schools earned a C or above in Duval County, which means that 1/3 of Duval County's charter schools earned D's or F this school year. These are some of the changes made by SB 758. Instead of strengthening transparency and accountability for charter schools, they made it harder for school districts to close charter schools. Rather than passing a law to make charter schools follow the same laws regarding D grades as the district-run schools, the legislators passed SB 758, which makes it harder for the school board to close a charter school. And here's a screenshot of that bill. I would like to convince you in this presentation to contact your state representative and ask them to sponsor bills that will do the following. Number 1 suggestion, change the rules for capital outlay funding going to charter schools in order to keep assets purchased with tax dollars within the public school system. Number 2 suggestion, change the rules so that charter schools that get a D or F 2 years in a row must close or turn over to another charter school or pay an outside vendor to bring the grade up to a C, just like the district-run schools are required to do. Suggestion number 3, change the rules so that new charter schools must always get a zoning change so the community can be notified. The Florida State Legislature approved Florida's charter school in 1996. In 1999, Duval County had 7 charter schools. In 2022, Duval County had 34 charter schools. This is a quote from a 2014 interview with Senator John Legg. And he's making the same suggestion that I did at the beginning of my presentation. Suggestion number 1, change the rules for capital outlay funding going to charter schools in order to keep assets purchased with tax dollars within the public school system. So this is what he says in the interview. I think we need to look at where that money's going, making sure it remains in the public sector, that the assets remain for the public, that it doesn't just go into lease options that maybe get turned over to private corporations. And a few years later, the charter school may move on. Charter schools are controlled by the state legislators, not the locally elected school board. Please play this 3-minute video of the July 11th school board meeting when a school board member says exactly that. I can give you all my references, which will have this link to the YouTube video, and you'll see it for slide 10 on the reference sheet. In the clip, Dr. Green and school board member Hershey discussed the fact that charter schools might be shut down if they receive an F 2 years in a row. But the State Board of Education can even overrule that. It's this statute. And here, see, it says the state board grants the charter school a waiver of termination. So a charter school could not only get D's time after time, year after year, but they could also get F's time after time, year after year, without being closed. So this is the idea. This is what I suggested at the beginning of the presentation. My suggestion number 1, charter schools that acquire their facility using public funds should assure that the facility stays within the public school system if the charter school should close. keep publicly funded school buildings within the public school system. I offer this as an example to make my point. Jacksonville Ordinance 2020-627 is an education bond approved by the Jacksonville City Council. If the charter school owned the building, then the building would revert to district property if the charter school should close. This is based on Florida Statute 1013.625, which I'll show you on the next slide. But the charter school will not own the building. Its affiliates will own the building. So here's a screenshot of that ordinance. So $23 million is the bond amount, and it's going to its affiliates. So what's going to happen here is the charter school is going to get our sales surtax money. They're going to use that money to make lease payments to these affiliates, and then the affiliates will use the lease payments to repay the loan. So the charter school is not going to own the building. So it's not going to revert to the district as is required by 1013.625. So here's how 1013.625 reads. If a charter school is non-renewed or terminated, any unencumbered funds, and I highlighted this here because I want you to remember this term. I'm going to mention it again later. So if a charter school is non-renewed or terminated, any unencumbered funds and all equipment and property purchased with district public funds shall revert to the ownership of the school board. And how do we enforce this? Because this is not happening. How do we strengthen it so it can be enforced? And this is the second part of 1013.625. These issues shall be agreed to in the charter contract prior to the expenditures of funds. Prior to, the contract needs to say how these assets will revert to the school district if the charter school should close. Charter Schools USA makes millions renting their buildings. Miami Beach Investor paid $9.9 million for a charter school building, but the school district didn't profit from that. That's, the school district didn't own the building. These are excerpts from another excellent journalist at my local paper, the Jacksonville Times-Union, Nate Monroe. Here's what he says. The state legislature passed a law in 2020 requiring sales tax proceeds to be split with charter schools. That law, intended or not, has meant that tens of millions of sales tax dollars earmarked for improving Jacksonville's academic buildings are actually headed to a scattered group of charter schools. The school district proactively created an oversight committee tasked with monitoring the progress. Members of the oversight committee tasked with monitoring have expressed multiple concerns over the long leash charters have to spend the money. I'll talk about the source of the capital outlay funds later. State law regulates how funds designated as capital outlay funds can be used. They are funds that the district uses to build, repair, and maintain public schools. Charter schools can use these outlay funds for lease payments. That's how the statutes read right now, but the statutes can be changed. Nate Monroe pondered the impact of capital outlay funding being used by charter schools for lease payments. Do these lease payments reflect fair market value? Are taxpayers getting a good deal? Nate concludes, with the scant information available, it's impossible to tell. And this is a screenshot of 1013.624, which controls how charter schools can spend capital outlay funds. The statute can be changed if the people demand it. Here's a few more excerpts from Nate Monroe's article. Millions of dollars collected from a half-penny sales tax in Jacksonville are going to a decentralized group of charter schools across the city, making it far more difficult to track how that money is being spent and to determine whether it's being used to improve school infrastructure. This is an excerpt from another study. The stories in the study illustrate how interwoven and self-serving charter governing boards can be. Profiteering may be the most sinister aspect of Florida's charters. The primary, and notice here I'm not saying the only, the primary state funding for fixed capital outlay funding comes from PECO, Public Education Capital Outlay and Debt Service Fund. And again, I'm saying the state. Well, I'm going to talk later on about how the local community can vote to provide more capital outlay funding for the public schools. So I just want to point out here, the primary state funding is PICO. And it's an excerpt from Representative Castor's op-ed. Public education, PICO, is a trust fund dedicated to maintaining public school buildings in Florida. And from 2011 to 2014, and during the last session, the legislature directed $0 to traditional public schools through PICO, but sent money to for-profit charters. And here's the screenshot for the last 2 years for Duval County charter schools. So this is the list of all the charter schools in Duval County. This is how much they got in 2020, 2021 school year. And this is how much they got in the last school year. And it's about $2 million each year. So $2 million each year for the charter schools and nothing for the district-run schools in those years. And this is where I got this information. And like I said, I can give you my references. This link will be at slide 25. So the same thing's going to happen this coming up year. $195 million in PICO funds to charter schools, even though only approximately 10% of the charter district students attend charter schools. And here's the screenshot of the bill. So $195 million in PICO funds to charter schools and almost nothing to the district-run schools. And here's where I got that 10%. There are more charter schools this year, so this percentage might be higher, which means that more of the capital outlay funding will be going to charter schools because the money is sent to charter schools on a per student basis. The lack of funds for renovating the neighborhood schools has come at a cost. The Florida chapter of the American Society of Civil Engineers gives the infrastructure of the state's schools a D+ for quality. Due to the lack of funding, counties across the state are passing referendums to increase their local sales surtax and millage rates to fund the renovations of their old school buildings that double as hurricane shelters. Because Duval has the oldest of any large school district in the state, the impact of these cuts has been severe. The district has not been able to build a new school since 2010. The school district asked the voters to approve a half-cent sales tax increase to enable the district to clear the backlog of maintenance issues and eliminate most, if not all, portables in the district. Luckily, the voters approved the referendum, and starting in 2021, the school buildings are being renovated or rebuilt. The next slides will discuss a few bills that our state legislators have passed that force local communities to fund charter schools even if they didn't want to. HB 7069 passed in 2017. Here's an excerpt from an op-ed. Bill 7069 requires that their charter schools, privately owned facilities, be funded at equal levels to Florida's public district-owned schools. HB 7123, which passed in 2019, forces the school districts to give charter schools money on a per-student basis if they want to raise money for the neighborhood and magnet schools with a voter-approved property tax increase. And then in 2022, HB 7097 forces the school district to share with charter schools on a per-student basis if we wanted to raise funds to renovate the school buildings that double as hurricane shelters via a local sales surtax increase. We, the Jacksonville voters, wanted to raise money to fix our publicly owned school buildings that were over 50 years old. The city council blocked us from voting in 2019, and in 2020, the state legislators forced us to give the money to charter schools on a per student rather than a needs basis if we wanted to raise money for a dedicated revenue source for the neighborhood school buildings that double as hurricane shelters. You can find the names of the city council members who stopped us from being able to vote on the referendum in 2019. If this bothers you, maybe you might not want to re-elect those council members that stopped us from being able to vote in 2019. The charter schools started receiving the sales surtax dollars in early 2021. The sales surtax Oversight Committee finally officially made this request. The Citizen Oversight Committee recommends the superintendent hire an outside agency to develop a charter school dashboard that is housed on the same website as the district's dashboard. In my view, the school district also needs to hire an attorney to make sure the charter schools comply with the ballot language and provide the information to the Oversight Committee. The public deserves to see a spreadsheet easily visible without the need for a public records request or hunting through every charter school's quarterly report for each and every charter school receiving our sales surtax dollars. We need one page with a row for each charter school and 3 columns. One column, revenue received, column 2, less money spent, and column 3, unencumbered funds. Remember, I told you about this term earlier, unencumbered funds. If we don't know the amount of the unencumbered funds, how are we going to enforce Florida Statute 1013.625? The second page of the spreadsheet on the Oversight Committee's dashboard for charter schools should show how each charter school spent the funds based on the allowable expenditures according to Florida Statute 1013.624, with an emphasis on conflict of interest in lease contracts. Were the leases with related parties? What is the purchase of assets that can be recouped by the school district if the charter school should close? A 2020 investigative report reveals that Florida is #2 in the country for charter school closures. Bill Wilcox, the research director for Integrity Florida, published a report titled The Hidden Cost of Charter Schools. At the time of the report, there were 658 charter schools in Florida. As of 2019, 409 charter schools had closed. So it looks like 1,000 charter schools open and 409 closed. So 40% of them are closing, right? I mean, that's how I read it. So what happens to the assets when charter school closes? Funds and equipment purchased with tax money are supposed to go to the school district when the charter schools close. But does it happen? The answer is on the next slide. It didn't happen in my county. I received this response from a public records request asking about capital outlay funds that reverted to the school district when charter schools closed. No funds or assets reverted to the school district when charter schools closed in my county. So I'm asking you, this is what I suggested at the beginning of the presentation. Please consider contacting your state representative and asking them to sponsor bills that will do the following: change the rules for capital outlay funding going to charter schools in order to keep assets purchased with tax dollars within the public school system. Specifically, change Florida Statute 1013.624 so the capital outlay funding must only go to schools housed in buildings where the profits will go to the school district if the building is sold. Change Florida Statute 1013.625 to make it clear that no distribution of capital outlay funding can be distributed to a charter school until the charter contract lays out in clear language how the assets will revert to the school district if the charter school should close. Number 2 suggestion, charter schools that get a D or F 2 years in a row must close or turn over to another charter school or pay an outside vendor to bring the grade up to a C, just like the district schools are required to do. Suggestion number 3, new charter schools must always get a zoning change for the community so the community can be notified. So in my community, charter school had to get a zoning change because they were building in an area where it was required. And it was going to create a terrible traffic jam. So the community all came out and spoke out, and the charter school withdrew their request. They're still going to build somewhere, but just not in that particular area. But what happened to another charter school is they bought some land where a church was. So because the church is similar zoning to a charter school, the charter school didn't have to get a zoning request. And so the neighbors, the people that lives on this road, didn't have a chance to object. So they just built it. And then after it happened, the neighbors were all up in arms because San Pablo Road is a little 2-lane road. And the charter school built right across the street from an A-rated elementary school. So both schools are getting people coming to them at the same time. So created a terrible traffic jam. Whereas if that school had been required to get a zoning change, the neighbors would have been alerted before they started building. So anyways, I hope you'll consider finding a state representative that will be willing to sponsor these bills. Thank you. And let me know if you want my references.